This is History for Cocktail Parties with hack historians Thornton Kennedy and James Ottley.
Welcome back to History for Cocktail Parties. This is Thornton Kennedy. I'm here with my co-host, or the co-host of History for Cocktail Parties, James Ottley. How you doing, James?
Doing great, man, especially now that you turned my mic back on.
It is true. We had some technical difficulties on episode 1. I did try to mute James, but dang it got through anyways.
I was beginning to think, maybe that was intentional. But
it was completely intentional. So we're going to get back into the Kennedy family, Joseph P. Kennedy, the dynasty. Catch us up on where we've been.
Yeah, so last episode we talked about how Joe, was had the Midas touch on pretty much everything, and he could also look into the future and he could see what was going to make money. He got into the movie business. We talked about that last time, somewhat controversially, at least with some of the theaters that he bought. He also got into the liquor importing business. Right. He made a ton of money on that, as you talked
Sold
about
it for
that.
$8 million
He did.
1940, whatever, 1930s.
He got into the real estate business, the Chicago Merchant Mart. Again, his acquisition was a kind of an interesting story there, pure Joe Kennedy. And then we talked about how he was very influential in getting FDR elected, was actually critical to getting FDR the nomination in the 1932, the Democratic National Convention.
Probably the single man who's most responsible for the New Deal.
It could be, yeah, besides FDR himself, right? And how he used that influence once FDR, was elected to get in on the chairman of the SEC, which we kind of remarked was kind of funny, but ended up being, doing a good job on that. And then also becoming the ambassador to England.
Which is the one time that he doesn't see it correctly.
That's right.
He makes a bad judgment.
Indeed.
And by trying to argue for appeasement with Hitler, he ends up costing him his political career.
Absolutely. But before we get into this episode and too much into that, I want to thank, again, our corporate sponsor, Play LLC.
It's so great to have partners in this, and we love their support of History for Cocktail Parties. We couldn't do it without them. About Play, business is serious, but who wants serious, stodgy marketing? Check out our friends at Play, a full-service advertising agency. They're deep in the mix with AI and digital know-how, driving more people to your door. And whether it's IRL, in real life, or virtual, Play ensures the right people find you and buy what you're selling. See their many case studies at goplaydesign.com. That's goplaydesign.com, and start growing your business today.
Very good. Thanks again to the folks at Play for your support.
Awesome. And now back into the story of Joe Kennedy.
Joe Kennedy and his establishment of the Kennedy dynasty.
Right.
We're gonna dive in here. We talked about how his career as a ambassador to England and his actions over there kind of ended his political aspirations. He did want to run for president, but that his activities over there kind of ended that for him. So he started to turn his attention towards his children.
Right.
And his first choice in terms of his children getting into politics was his son, Joseph Kennedy Jr.
Right.
Unfortunately, Joe Kennedy Jr., who was killed actually in a B-24 Liberator in World War II. He had volunteered for this risky mission. It wasn't just a regular B-24 Liberator. This one was specially designed to be loaded with high explosives and then directed to its target remotely, almost like a drone.
It was the first drone, essentially.
Predecessor.
Why
to the
was
drone.
Joe Kennedy in it?
Well, he said he volunteered for this we'll get into just how risky it was, or reckless, really, it was. Joe flew this mission, but right before he did, an electronics officer warned him that the remote control device that was to detonate the explosives was faulty, and that anything like radio static or a jamming device or excessive turbulence, anything like that could trigger an explosion before the pilots had bailed out. I don't know. Did we mention that they load this plane with explosives? The pilots are in it.
Okay, then
they fly it and they jump out, and then it is
Then
once
the
it's in
remote
the
control.
So, and I do think it was a combat.
I thought
mission.
so. My understanding was that they were trying to figure out a way to fully automate so that they could fly it remotely the whole way. But you would have a pilot in it over 3/4 of the mission, just off the top of my head.
Right.
He would bail.
Right.
And then the remote control would take over. And
exactly.
crash. Interesting.
Right. And that's why I think it was an actual a real combat mission, because it was, loaded with bombs. But here again, the main point is that Joe knew before he took off that the detonator, the remote control detonator, was faulty.
Right.
And they asked him, they speculate that he signed up for this mission and went ahead and tried to complete it anyway, because he was trying to compensate for his father's reputation as a coward. And he wanted to prove that the Kennedys were not yellow. We talked about in our last episode how Joe Kennedy had fled, the city limits of London to avoid the bombs when everybody else was suffering.
I had read in Dark Side of Camelot again that this was the first time that his children stood up to him. He was an appeaser. He didn't like war. And yet John Kennedy, Joe Kennedy, Teddy Kennedy, they all serve in this war, despite the fact that their father was yellow and had avoided service in World War I.
Right. And I think we're at odds at that. My understanding is that, at least with Jack Kennedy, and probably with Joe too, Joseph Jr., that he had political aspirations for his children, and he knew at this time, basically, having a military career was almost essential to getting elected to office. So you and I may disagree on that point.
So you think that his father was actually
100%
pro
service,
because he knew that this was going to be, this would look good on the
this would be a stepping stone into politics after the war. So with Joe Jr.'s death, he now turns to Jack Kennedy, his other son.
And we mentioned earlier, upon Joe's death, JFK says the dude's like being drafted. He knew. He knew what it meant.
He didn't want to do it. Yeah, I mean, I think he actually admitted to that even before Joe died to a reporter.
Joe was the charismatic, the leader. He had his father's charm. He had his father's savvy. John F. Kennedy was a rake. He was a party guy and, had made some interesting life choices so far.
Right. But I mean, he certainly grew. I mean, maybe he had the charm, but he wasn't necessarily using it in the same way that his father was, or that he thought that it could be used in politics.
And he had some sickly attributes. He was not well.
Right.
I mean, there were just some things. Joe is
bad back.
Right. He had all these issues that would not be ideal for a politician. In fact, they hid one of the diseases he had from childhood from the public.
Right.
So there were some reasons that he was not really ever considered to be the number one kid. But then Joe Sr. dies in this insane plane accident.
Right. Exactly.
Operation Aphrodite, by the way.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well done. Well played. So anyway, so now Jack's, the front runner, for Joe. And so Joe, talks him into it, says, it's now time. You've got to enter politics. And
does he go for the Congress seat that his Honey Fitz held? Was that what he did?
Gosh, that's I don't know. It was the 11th Congressional District.
It was
that
the same seat that Honey Fitz had. And if y'all don't know who if y'all don't know who Honey Fitz is, go back and listen to episode 1 with the not great sound quality, but we do identify that his grandfather was
in that congressional seat.
And was in that congressional seat.
Or had held it before.
Right.
And the reason that they picked that, and the reason that Fitz picked it as well, and just living there, was it had a heavy concentration of Catholic voters.
Right.
And it was the perfect launching pad for Jack's career.
Right.
So the seat at the time was held by a guy named James Curley. He was a former mayor of Boston. He held the seat. But he was being indicted for mail fraud, or taxes and not paying his taxes, and also mail fraud. And he needed money. So Joe Kennedy Sr., approaches him, offers to pay him to get out of his congressional seat, which he does. pays him $12,000 through one of Joe Kennedy's cronies, and promises him additional campaign help if he decides to run for a different office, which he did. He actually ran for the mayor of Boston in 1946 and got elected, even with this tax fraud and mail fraud hanging over him. And after he got elected, this is curly, just kind of a funny side story, Boston politics, he was sent to prison, but he continued to serve as mayor after he was.
Of course
he did.
That is the way that the Bostonian politics work.
Indeed.
100%. And by the way, John F. Kennedy was very close to his grandfather, who had also served as mayor and was a big political bigwig, Honey Fitz, we had mentioned earlier. And Honey Fitz loved taking young John around Boston and going to all of his old haunts and introducing his grandson. This was a real accomplishment for him. He was really proud of his.
So he had that influence. That he saw that politics was something you could do, you know, from his grandfather. That's great. Appreciate your adding that in. So, Jack announces his candidacy in 1946, April 25th. And right after that, maybe the next month even, in May, Joe forms the Joseph P. Kennedy Foundation. And the foundation immediately begins pumping money into Jack's adopted district, to the various charities and whatnot, you know. And so Joseph Kennedy Foundation supporting charities in that district. You know,
it's almost an early super PAC.
Yeah,
it's a political action campaign. It's just crazy that he had created that way before anyone else did.
Right.
Of course, his was under the auspice of charity.
Right.
Supporting all these great causes, but all that money is directly tied to his son being elected to office.
Absolutely.
Back then, you couldn't.
Yeah,
but now he can make it.
And what great timing too! 1 month after he announces his candidacy. So the other great story about that initial run was there were several other candidates actually for the nomination. This was before the general election. One of them was a guy named Michael Neville. He was the mayor of Cambridge. There was another guy named Joseph Rousseau, and those were his other two competitors for the nomination. Joe Rousseau was a politician already. He had served in a lower capacity and was somewhat known to voters. So Joe Kennedy goes out and finds a local janitor named Joseph Rousseau and paid him to enter the race to create confusion. Isn't that fantastic?
That is awesome.
You can't make this stuff up.
You really couldn't.
And so, as a result, Jack wins the nomination. The vote, voters are confused. You got two Joe Russos on the ticket along with Jack and this other guy. So in addition, so he wins the nomination.
The amount of money that is spent in that race is ridiculous.
It is.
Joe throws a ton of money. No one had ever seen this kind of spending on a congressional race.
He spent $300,000 on this campaign. And Tip O'Neill, who was the House Speaker in the 1980s, said that he had spent that was the equivalent of $2.2 million, and it was 6 times what O'Neill spent in the same district, when he had run a tough race, 6 years later. But going back to one other kind of trick that Joe Kennedy pulled for Jack, we mentioned in the second episode that Joseph was friends with William Randolph Hearst.
Right.
And so he got Hearst to give Jack special attention in his newspapers, and he got Hearst to ignore this other candidate, Michael Neville, for the nomination, and he would not accept Neville's advertising, and he wouldn't write about him in the paper. So Jack definitely had a leg up on that first.
No question. Well, not only was he the grandson of the man who held the seat, but an unbelievable amount of power and money ensured that was going to be a successful run.
Indeed. My favorite part, though, is the fact that he went out and hired a janitor. Had to find another Joseph Rousseau and put him on the ballot. That's not necessarily ethical, but it is.
It's brilliant. You got to hand it to him.
Evil brilliance.
You have to hand it to him. He risked nothing.
Indeed.
This thing was 100% in the bag when he hired the guy that swept the floor.
Exactly, with the same name. So Jack was elected to Congress 3 times, and then he began his race for the Senate in April of 1952. And Joe Kennedy helped on this race as well. there was a guy named John Fox who had just bought the Boston Post for $4 million. And apparently, if you got the endorsement of the Boston Post, you were in like Flint.
Right.
And so Joe goes to John Fox, and he says, "Look, we really got to help my son out." And so he ends up paying off or making this Mr. Fox a really sweet deal of a loan, super low interest, no collateral, no commercial bank would make this loan. And so Fox, after he, Fox was actually going to endorse Jack's competitor or opponent, but within 2 days of meeting with Joe Kennedy and this secret arrangement,
suddenly,
now he is endorsing Jack Kennedy. He gets a front page endorsement, and political hacks said that Fox's front page endorsement of Jack was the turning point in the campaign.
Wow.
And so that was what won it for Jack.
Wow.
The Senate seat,
Amazing.
So he wins that Senate seat in November and wins it November 4th, 1952. Here again, you talked about the money that was spent.
Can we say he beat Henry Cabot Lodge?
Yes, he did.
He beat one of the biggest names in America.
Yes.
In that race.
He sure did.
It's crazy.
Money talks, right? Money and influence talks.
Joe Kennedy talks.
Indeed. So he wins that Senate seat, and he reported that his expenses for the campaign were $349,000. But people said, look, that probably wasn't even enough to pay for the billboard announcements. Joe Kennedy later admitted that he had spent something like $13 million. I'm trying to find where that figure was, but it was a lot of money, which, other candidates they didn't have that kind of money, and they didn't have that kind of influence, and they didn't have Joe Kennedy.
Right. And can we talk? I want to back up real quick and talk about one of my nits with Kennedy is he gets all this credit for all of the things he accomplished. He was not a very effective congressman. He had a high absentee rate.
Is that right?
He didn't interact with his constituents. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Kennedy working town halls. He was sort of absentee, and then the same trend continues in the Senate. He gets into the Senate, and he, almost has a blasé attitude about.
Is that
service. Right?
Now, see, I didn't know that, but that's almost hard for me to believe because he was such a personable fellow, and I could see him. He was certainly certainly upper class type,
right?
But like
he was not in touch with the common man,
an Aldrich type, if you will. But
maybe
going back to our Fed episode, which we promised never to talk about again, but I could see him being. He's such a personable guy. I could see him doing these town halls, but I'll take your word for it.
It's funny because Honey Fitz was very much in that model. Honey Fitz loved being up in front of a room and talking and singing. I believe JFK really liked being with his groups of guys and just having a great time.
Right.
I don't think he was very interested in legislation.
Okay.
I don't think he did a lot of leadership, and that's something that it's that retelling.
Yeah.
That prism through which you see a person is very different from how he actually was in his early political career.
And of course, because he was shot down, we also go back, people's memories or the stories that are told about him are, we don't want
to disrespect the dead here.
We're not disrespecting him at all. So anyway, he wins the Senate seat. And so Joe says, all right, now, if you're going to set your sights, we're going to set your sights on the presidency.
Right.
You got to go get married. And so very shortly after that, he, finds Jackie and they get married in 1952.
Can I jump in?
I love the, I was shocked. I was shocked by this story that you're just about to tell us.
This is again, Dark Side of Camelot, which is written by a gentleman named Seymour Hersh. So do not come after Thornton Kennedy or James Ottley for this. But apparently he married before he married Jackie. He married a woman named Dury Malcolm during a party. He had met her at a party in Palm Beach. She was a socialite. She was from a very affluent family, and they got married. And apparently the marriage was never annulled. So he had married this woman in 1947, I think.
Okay.
And it was one of those things that no one ever talked about. In Seymour Hersh's book, he has some of JFK's best friends being like, "Oh, I remember the wedding.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, we were all like, what are you doing? You're throwing your life away."
Yeah.
And it was just a really terrible decision
Okay.
by JFK. And who quashes it?
Let's hear.
Joseph P. Kennedy Sr.
Who?
I Thornton, you got me a big lead here. No, his father.
Have you learned nothing?
His father swept that thing under the rug so quickly that no one ever, even though it was rumored, no one spoke about it.
Okay. Until now.
Yeah. And, going back to the Catholic thing, you really could not get divorced.
Okay.
It was frowned upon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not only
they probably also got frowned upon getting, being married to two people at the same time.
You think polygamy is not acceptable in the Catholic Church?
Yeah.
Oh, we are just going to get in trouble for this episode, James. Can we get back to our notes?
Well, we're speaking of the Catholic Church, and so it's kind of a great little segue of in I don't know if it's the Senate campaign or one of his House campaigns, or maybe all of them, but Joe Kennedy involved the Catholic Church in some of the fundraising, if you can call it that. So Boston area churches, for example, would collect, say, $950,000, in the collection plates on a particular Sunday.
Right.
And then Joe, they had a deal with Joe, or Joe had a deal with him, where Joe would write a check for $1 million to the diocese, and then deduct that as a charitable contribution. But he would receive, the church would give him the $950,000 in cash, just bags of money.
Wow.
And so the church got, this was in the book. I'm not making this up.
These are things we have read.
Exactly.
These are not James Ottley and Thornton Kennedy just riffing here. These are things that other people have written about.
I have nothing against the church. I have nothing against the Kennedys. Maybe this Kennedy that turns my mic off from
one Kennedy.
The one Kennedy that I have a problem with, but sometimes. But anyway, so Joe would write a check for $1 million, $50,000 more than the $950 he was getting from the collection plate.
It's unreal.
And then he would write, get to write that off on his taxes as a $1 million donation. The $950,000 in cash would be used, to
do all whatever
needed to be done to get Kennedy elected. So anyway, I thought that was kind of
is fascinating.
Yeah, indeed. So actually, I found that quote. Joe bragged one time that he spent $13 million and $4 million went to buy the nomination. I guess that was for the presidency.
Right. I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So, and the other thing, the influence just kept on going. Bobby Kennedy was the attorney general because Joe Kennedy in the pool at, his West Palm Beach or Palm Beach home, not West Palm Beach, Palm Beach home, told Jack, "You're making Bobby Kennedy. He's done a lot for you.
Yeah.
You're making him the attorney general." And, Bobby had never practiced law before. He'd never argued in a courtroom. I guess he wasn't qualified,
Right.
But Joe said, "Look, you're going to make him attorney general."
Well,
it's a good thing he did. Bobby Kennedy was a stalwart for the civil rights movement. So it ended up, even though, it ended up, he wasn't qualified to do it. He definitely, stood up.
The reason Joe Kennedy says that to JFK is because of his familiarity with the American political system. You can't trust anyone.
Okay.
The reason you have to make Bobby your, attorney general is because everyone out here is in for themselves.
Right.
Which is exactly what Joe Kennedy did to FDR.
Yeah.
So he had firsthand knowledge
Well, that makes sense.
of letting the fox into the hen house. And the only person that would shoot straight with him and would protect him
was his brother.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense.
It was not a great, didn't pass the smell test.
Yeah.
But for Joe Kennedy, he knew he had to have one of his family members in there protecting all of this.
That's a good point. Great point. Profiles in Courage, the famous book, a little bit about that, and that, well, first of all, that it was one of the things that kind of helped propel, Jack as a
he
candidate.
Writes at 56 or something when he's convalescing from spinal surgery.
Yeah, if he wrote it at all. And so there's little resemblance between what Jack, actually wrote, in terms of what he turned in, his version of the book and the actual finished product.
Sure.
Joe was heavily involved with getting other folks to kind of help ghostwrite it, and he actually got Arthur Kroc, who was one of his people that he was close with. Who was kind of the dean of the Washington, news people and had won a Pulitzer Prize, to lobby the Pulitzer Prize board to get it, nominated or to get it to get Jack a Pulitzer Prize for it. But there again, it was an example where, Jack got a leg up because of his father. He didn't really, write this great book. Other people helped him write it, and Joe got it. And another thing with the book was that Joe got all of his employees and political people to buy the book, so it became a national bestseller. Yeah. So again, I mean, there's the theory or the we're not trying to dish on the Kennedys, but the point of just to kind of continue the theme, like Joe Kennedy. His hands were,
100%.
and everything involved in every step, every stage of the game.
And I can't remember which. So this was something that was well known at the time. It was speculated that Kennedy had not actually written this book. And one of the premier television journalists of the time sat down with Kennedy,
Mike Wallace, and
kind of grilled him. And he was able to answer enough questions.
Is that right?
About the book. But, as a PR guy, you can train your person to be able to answer the questions if you know that they are.
Well, I thought what you were going. Yeah, I hear you. I thought though that what you were going to reference, Mike Wallace, I guess just starting out in those times, had of 60 Minutes fame, had a show on ABC, and interviewed somebody who basically said, "No, Kennedy didn't write this book."
Interesting.
And Joe Kennedy, of course, threatened to sue.
Oh, right. I do know that story.
Demanded an apology, and ABC, caved in. And they on the next episode, they had somebody, read an apology.
I think that's what led to the interview where Kennedy answered the questions correctly about the book. So, but it was clearly set up.
Yeah.
So that is actually,
and again, we're not trying to put down Jack Kennedy's memory. But just to kind of continue the theme that his father had his hands in everything. Yeah. And so that's my point.
I honestly believe that that's part of how we get to 20th century American politics.
Yeah.
This is when those kind of backroom deals and all the manipulation starts to really manifest itself. Prior to that, you had Dwight Eisenhower, who's just stiff as a rod, and then you come into this just the
Nixon years,
etc.
What is
going on here? Why? What the heck?
So the Kennedys. Obviously they had the two assassinations, the tragedy of that, but the Kennedy. You call it the Kennedy curse.
The Kennedy curse. I think it's absolutely right.
Yeah, kind of continued, and none of them had. Had a good situation in terms of aircraft. There's so many
different airplane incidents.
Yeah, we talked about Joseph Kennedy Joe Jr., but after that, and not too long after that, maybe 4 years after that, Kathleen Kennedy, his sister, was killed in a plane crash. Her nickname was Kick. She had been dating after her husband died, a guy named Peter Fitzwilliam. He was a British lord. He was married, but was going to get divorced, and so the Kathleen Kennedy was going to go with him to kind of sneak away for a weekend in Cannes, and they rented a plane. And the pilot advised that a thunderstorm was predicted. It was too risky, and all commercial flights had been canceled, but Fitzwilliam insisted that they go anyway.
Right.
Kathleen went along with it. The plane crashed tragically, so Joe loses another child at that point. Ted Kennedy also was kind of. We talk about the Kennedy curse. A lot of it maybe is brought on by their own recklessness. I'm thinking maybe that the rules. We've heard it said that the rules, maybe they think the rules don't apply to them,
and they certainly didn't apply to Joe Kennedy, their dad. So.
Yeah, and so. They inherited that, I guess, kind of, hey, the rules don't apply to me. Another example, Ted, this was 5 years before Chappaquiddick. We're not going to get into Chappaquiddick. Right. But in 1964, Ted wants to get the family pilot, to fly the family plane, take him to Springfield for the Massachusetts Democratic Convention. Pilot refuses, says the weather is crappy, it's severe fog, there's no way we can fly. Ted says, well, to heck with you. He charters another plane, and this talks this pilot into making the trip. This plane crashes in Southampton. Ted makes it out alive. He's injured, but makes it out alive. But the pilot was killed along with Ted's administrative aide.
What?
Yeah, and
Before Chappaquiddick?
This was 5 years, Yeah, so then he didn't learn his lesson, Joseph Kennedy II, who's the son of Bobby Kennedy, was known for reckless activities. In 93, he tried to take a bunch of kids out in hurricane-force winds to go sailing. Luckily, they made it through it okay, or weren't able to get out.
Just putting people at risk, though.
Putting people at risk. Another time, I don't know if it was which family member this was, but they were letting the Kennedy kids scramble up on the roof of one of the Hyannisport houses, trying to lasso the chimney. Luckily everybody made it out of that okay. Of course, there was the high profile, plane crash, the John Johns plane crash. Again, tragic. 1999.
I don't mean to be dismissive, but wasn't he not instrument rated?
That's exactly
flying in crap weather.
Yeah, I say to his defense, this happens time and time again. He planned the flight for daylight hours. It was in a Piper Saratoga. I think that I may be wrong about this, but I've heard that plane is called the Doctor Killer. It's a hard plane to fly. He was gonna fly over to Martha's Vineyard. His wife died in the crash. His sister-in-law was also killed, and they NTSB concluded that it was spatial disorientation. And the tragic thing was they waited, or he had to wait until 8:38 to take off. They're supposed to take off earlier than that, but somebody, either his wife or sister-in-law, got delayed at work. And so they had to, but they still they're still reckless to take that flight, half an hour after sunset. The other just tragic thing about this was that his flight instructor had actually offered, he was new on this plane, it's a new plane to him, and his flight instructor had actually offered to fly with him.
Oh my God.
On this trip, due to the conditions and due to the fact that he was new to this plane. And it's just one example. And then this didn't involve an aircraft, but Michael Kennedy, who was the sixth, I think, of 11 children of another Bobby Kennedy child, died in 1997 in a skiing accident.
Oh, that damn, yeah.
The Kennedys were told time and time again, don't play football on the slopes.
Right.
It's dangerous. And back then, nobody wore helmets, and so, here's this tragic accident. Could have been prevented by following the rules, and so, Joseph Kennedy, as we said, didn't think the rules really applied to him. And unfortunately, a lot of that was transferred to his children and other progeny, grandchildren.
That's right. And he loved his family. That's kind of the big takeaway. He is this unsavory character, right? He makes a ton of money, and he pulls a lot of levers in a lot of different ways, and a lot of levers were pulled for him in a lot of different ways.
Right.
But he really loved his family and wanted his family to succeed. One of the reasons he made all that money is he wanted to give each of his children $1 million, which is almost comical considering he had 100. He was one of the wealthiest men
in the country.
In the country,
maybe the world.
At some point, it's almost like Breaking Bad. You've made enough money,
right? You
can stop, completely scorched earth policy. But for him to lose all of those children,
it's tragic.
And he had suffered a stroke, so that Bobby Kennedy has to go in and tell him that JFK has passed away, has been assassinated. Bobby is assassinated before he dies.
Right. Yeah. The stroke as well. And it was very tragic for him.
So, James, I think that gets us to the story of Joseph P. Kennedy.
It does.
It's a really important subject, because in order to understand the politics of 2025 and the politics of the last 100 years, it's important to understand how Joe Kennedy changed the landscape.
I agree with that.
He changed it with his wealth. He changed it with his influence, with his power. He obviously gave us a president of the United States, and it's an important story in American history.
And he paid a big price for it as well.
He absolutely did. And I might argue the country paid a big price for it as well.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. Well, we'll see you on next episode. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to History for Cocktail Parties with hack historians James Ottley and Thornton Kennedy. Please like and subscribe. And now that the episode's over, you can go pour yourself another round, and we'll catch you next time.